Right, we're going. Well, this is my first time in Akasha, and many of my friends have been here, so it's nice to actually be here in person. And I'd like to thank all of you repeat attendees. So thank you very much for coming to the Pyramids of Chi and then coming back. So I can't have done anything too horrible to you. As always, I have no idea what's going to happen, but what I'd like to do is actually co-create what's going to come through. So what we'll do is just take a minute to come into our hearts and then bring the thought form of this talk, which is already done, into the space, and all I have to do is read the lines, which will be much easier. So let's co-create it. So close your eyes. So the time's currently 4:30, and you're observing this space from the eye of your heart. It's the golden eye that is right in the center of your heart, which is all-knowing and exists outside time and space. Feeling the relaxation in your heart as you gently breathe. Watch time flow backwards. So each of you has a precious gift that you carry, the jewel of your soul. And I feel you in this center of your heart, opening the box that contains the tabernacle that contains this jewel, and sharing it with the group. We create harmony as the jewels of our soul weave their light together. And see the golden light that is the love, that's the essence of your heart. Open up and fill this space. And time continues to flow backwards. And now we're present at the beginning of the talk in what the mundane world calls time. So thank you. You can open your eyes. I appreciate you sharing. There was a time when light was the consciousness that we all shared. Rudolf Steiner talks about how the light beings were very tall, and he was talking about maybe 1 million years ago, 500,000 years ago, and maybe even more. But these light beings, their consciousness was in the dream time. And as they evolved into density. But the original people in Australia, still connect to that dream time, and they understand that is their reality. You know, their DNA is 400,000 years old, much older than modern man out of Africa, 50,000 years old at the latest. An Asian man 10,000 years ago. So it seems to me that we can access that wisdom at any time, because it's all preserved in this concept of counterspace, the pure energy that forms the toroid of existence in magnetic terms. According to Steiner's evolution of consciousness, as time went on, the more advanced beings, as I say, spent more time in the dense world. And he saw the evolution into density, say through the Neanderthals. They had a bigger cerebellum than we do, so their imaginal world was much greater, their intuitive capacity was much greater. And they built structures in Romania, for example, including the Sphinx, which on one side has a Neanderthal face. So when we go into our inner world, when we do inner alchemy, what we're doing is we're introducing ourselves to the mythical reality. But I would argue that the mythical reality is actually much stronger and more vibrant than this thing. This thing is a useful illusion to allow the soul to experience resistance, because clearly there's no resistance in the imaginal world. Through resistance we learn awareness. We learn to face the parts of ourselves that are blind. And then from that we can, I guess, cleanse ourselves and be of more service, not only to others, but most importantly to our own soul journey. And at the end of that, obviously we return for another round of golf, cosmic golf, through the Vado of living and dying. So why is light important? In Dzogchen, the clear light precedes the four colored lights. And Dzogchen is viewed as the highest form of Tibetan teaching. It was completely heretical when it came into being. It probably came out of Shaivism from Kashmir. There's a big correlation between non-dual Shaivism and Dzogchen. But somehow that non-dual consciousness came and sits on top of Bon as animism, and then the very formalistic Buddhist practices and Tantra, and in particular 90% of Tantra is the right-hand Tantra of visualization. So on top of that sits Dzogchen. They have a number of really wonderful images. One of them is glass pipes, crystal pipes really, which connect the heart to the eyes. And my Qigong practice originates from Tibet. Master Wang came to Silicon Valley, where I was living, about 1998, and according to him, he was given written instructions about where he would meet each person. Like his first disciple was in LA, in a certain street corner at a certain time. I met him later. I ended up being in the fourth group of disciples, which was, there were just four of us. Yeah, please come. And again, what came to me, the practices in this Tibetan Qigong were really quite specific, and they were you can see similarities between many of the Tibetan teachings. But doing it and realizing I was going to do it every day had a number of beneficial effects. One of which is I realized I couldn't work anymore because my practice took 3 hours. And then something really amazing happened. I was working at a company called Cisco. I'd worked at Next before with Steve Jobs, and then I just followed my guidance. I ended up there, and I was teaching yoga every day because that was my agreement with my manager, Prem Jain. And Prem Jain actually, he was the main person who funded the building of the Jaini temple in Milpitas, which is really, really beautiful. I gave a talk there once. But anyway, he told me, I'm too busy now, because when I started working for him, he had maybe 20 direct reports. By that time he had 300. And then by early 2000, he was second in control of 14,000 engineers in Cisco. So I always stayed where I was. I was just, so I'm an engineer. I don't go into management, but I kept doing my thing. So he said, go and find another project, and you have 2 weeks, or else you have to leave the company. So I managed to find a network processor project done by the East Coast, RTP, and I was in Silicon Valley, and I was working with Toshiba. But the result of that was that I never went into work once in 3 years. Seriously, I saw my clients during the day. I would teach yoga often in the evening, and then I'd do my simulations at night. So from 97 to 2000, literally that was it. It was crazy. So sometimes Spirit really looks after you. And if I look back at all the things I did, like building music synthesizers in the 70s in England and dropping out of medical school, I realized it brought me to the point of working with light. And even that, I had no clue that I was ever going to do that. No clue at all. I guess I'll tell the story briefly. The Ajna Light, which is here, an Australian couple who were literally friends of friends of friends wanted to come to Chiang Mai, go to Tao Gardens, meet Mantak Chia and everything. And I was asked if they could come and stay with me. I said, okay, fine. They had this Lucia light, which is developed by 2 Austrian doctors, Dirk and Engelbert, neurologist and a psychologist, and they built a hypnagogic machine to help people come off their medications. People are in depression and things like that. So I had to go on this thing, and the software was a complete disaster. And it broke down 5 minutes into me using it, and so I had a quick look, and it's like, oh my god! And it cost $30,000, and it was like, but I could see something going on, and I could see people having interesting experiences with it. So when they went off to Tao Gardens that Sunday, I was literally gardening, and I got a download of what I was meant to do. I mean, specific stuff, like exactly the LEDs I was meant to use, Wi-Fi hotspot, a web app. I mean, things I didn't know how to do at all, but I was told this is what you do. And that it would be spread by light ambassadors. And so Mr. Tavis, okay, Tavis is a light ambassador. Mm-hmm. And actually, Rama, I guess you are now. You're a PyraLight ambassador if you want. So anyone who buys the product can talk about it to their friends and help them and stuff like that. So the light, what I noticed was happening, even the very first time I looked down over my prototype 3 months after starting, something was going on which was a DMT experience, although I didn't know that at the time. A friend of mine told me to Google melanopsin, and melanopsin was only discovered in the late 90s. It's the third visual system. Have any of you heard of melanopsin? No. Okay, so mice use it, for example, for low light vision, so they can see easily in the dark. And it's neuronal cells in the back of the retina, evenly spaced, and they're highly sensitive to light. And this Japanese paper, they in the late 90s, they discovered that the eyes dilated when this particular blue light frequency was given, and that it was 10 times stronger, the effect, with pulsing. So pulse systems have been well known since even in the 50s and 60s. The Dream Machine was Byron, what's his name? The friend of William Burroughs. Anyway, he was on a train in France and saw all the trees going by, and he got into a hypnagogic state. In other words, got in a sort of half asleep, half awake state. And so then he took a record player and a light cover, and cut holes in it, so it was spinning round with just a 100-watt light bulb in it, and people get zoned out. And William Burroughs said, this is the future of art, internal art, that we create ourselves. Now, all of this fell out of favor in the mid-90s. There was a paper published by Stanford saying brainwave entrainment doesn't work, and that's because they were trying to treat the brain as a machine and just doing, okay, we're on this frequency and you're going to have an hour of this frequency non-stop, and then you're going to be able to learn better, or you'll be more relaxed. And of course the brain was happy to follow, but it got bored and nothing really changed. So with the Ajna Light, what I created was, I call it ILST, Intentional Light Self-Therapy. The reason I came up with it was because all the light machines have presets, and I did my first one called Human, which it's a journey a lot of people use, and it's quite simple, but it does take you up through the brain waves and then back down, and a lot of people can have very powerful visions in it. But I was about to go to Bali in China, in Yunnan, in 3 days, and I was thinking, I don't want to spend the next 6 months composing journeys with people I've never met, because I don't know what they need. Everyone's individual. We all have our different soul journeys. And then I saw this sound mixer. Literally, I saw it. I was doing my Qigong practice, and I was, okay, what am I going to do? I saw the sound mixer, and I realized what I was being told to do. It was to have, it's called in mathematics, constrained stochastics. In other words, random generation, but where people could constrain, okay, I want so much beta, or I want lambda, or that kind of thing, how long I want my events to be, what relative background and foreground intensities. So when I worked out the probabilities, there are actually 10 to the power 1,000 journeys you could get out of it. And I used a JavaScript timer to start the thing. So like an angel card, you know exactly which journey you're going to get, or which card you'll get. So with this, the millisecond in which you press the generate button, you'll get a different journey. So your unconscious mind can pick the journey you want. So you set your intention, make a journey. And so there are many therapists around the world who've got the Ajna Light. It's sold about 600, and it's mainly to therapists. It's very good as a therapy tool, but it's also one you can use as self-therapy. So, as we're on that track, the PyraLight is my new device, and it comes out of the Ajna Light. We're using the Ajna Light for neuroplasticity. I'm sure a lot of you are aware that Alzheimer's and dementia is an extremely important issue for older people all over the world. Like tens of millions now. And amyloid plaque is just the marker of that. It's like cholesterol. It's not the issue, it's the inflammation that causes the body to respond, depositing cholesterol as plaque. That's the issue. So amyloid plaque is exactly the same defense mechanism in the brain. The brain's got toxic overload, horrible lifestyle, food, no good quality sleep, all those kind of things. When you're young, children are highly neuroplastic. They literally rewire their brain all the time. But you need a lot of energy to do that, physical energy from the mitochondria. So there are thousands of trillions of mitochondria in the body. Each of those mitochondria actually has its own DNA. It's the only organelle that was incorporated into cells that actually has its own DNA running still. So it has a longer life cycle normally, but if that's disturbed by oxidative damage, you lose your mitochondria, and if you lose your mitochondria, then you don't have the energy to change from one state to the other. So old people are very fixed. They have one pattern that they can play. This is the way it is. Life was better when I was young, blah, blah, blah. So we were looking at that. The Neurolight is a programming of the Ajna Light, research-based, by my friend Garnet Dupuy, who's really good at researching this. He was doing strobe lights and acid in college in the 60s. He's brought the Russian scanner technology, bioresonance technology, to the West. He's very good in myofascial release. He had a college in Santa Monica for 25 years, taught about 10,000 people. So, he really knows his stuff. And we incorporated the connectome into it. So the connectome is equivalent to the genome in terms of how the brain works. So in 80s kind of simplistic EEG science, the ridiculous way science is so simplistic, they said, okay, relaxation is 10 hertz. But it's not. 10 hertz, it turns out, is only one component. The brain is actually talking to itself on harmony of frequencies. So some parts of the brain will talk to each other at 10 hertz, but others like 21 or 19. There's this whole symphony going on that's only just been revealed through Laplace transforms of functional fMRI. So it's really fascinating. So we incorporated those. There are 7 networks, the most important one being the default mode network. And we also used research from a book called Psychedelic IT, which shows how the brain works. And it's a model of the brain working in micro-interrupts, just like computer architecture. It's very interesting. So as a result of that, we wanted to be able to help people upregulate their mitochondria directly, and light can do that. If you think about it, photons are perturbations arriving from the sun, going through chlorophyll, and they end up in your mitochondria, where they generate energy and stored as electricity. They're literally little batteries. So Tesla said, take your food directly from the sun. In other words, vegan. You don't want second-hand second-hand photons. All life obviously is based on the sun here. So I was developing a band with LEDs on, and you can unplug those if you want, just by pulling pulling them out, sort of thing. So that's what I was doing, and I had this band, and I could feel something from it, but transcranial stimulation, I found a Chinese device which was intranasal. All the blood goes through the capillaries and the edge of the nose very quickly, and also it shines directly into the hypothalamus. So it was upregulating. The Chinese took this technology from the Russians 20 years ago, use it for stroke, Alzheimer's, anything. It's amazing technology. So I was providing that for the Neurolight, but I was still playing with these LEDs because I like LEDs. And then one day I was told, put this coil of wire I had on my desk in my workroom, put it with the LEDs. And so after that the PyraLight came. I've mentioned altered states of consciousness a few times, and I'm sure most of you are open to that, the stone date theory of Terence McKenna. So I went to a talk by Terence McKenna in 1999, just before he died. And then through the Ajna Light, I was invited to Tyringham Hall in July 2016. And also, as a result of that, I was invited back 2017 for a symposium. So I met Dennis McKenna. Actually, the funny thing was, I went into the hall is one of the most beautiful country homes in England. It's really amazing. So I went into the music room, and there was Dennis sitting at his desk on the computer, and I just went up and chatted to him. And then I put him on the light, and he said, yeah, this is a DMT experience. So he's a big supporter of what I'm doing. I met, as I say, I met some very interesting people in Tyringham, particularly for ESPD 50. So that was Terence McKenna. By the way, you know who Terence McKenna is? No? Have you heard of ayahuasca? Okay. So ayahuasca was popularized, and also psilocybin mushrooms. All the research was done by Terence and Dennis McKenna. And so the stone date theory is that basically Neanderthals were eating mushrooms, and those same protein strands that are in there end up in the brain, and they're not in the brain of other apes. And so the people the ones who could think outside the box were the ones who were taking the mushrooms. Actually, Santa Claus, who knows the real story of Santa Claus?
Is it the Coca-Cola one?
No. So the real Santa Claus is from Nordic tradition. Under the pine trees in the winter, the toadstools come, and they grow in like a fairy ring around the pine trees. And so the shaman would go out and gather them, but because it was until he'd have his bag to gather them all up in, and because it was really cold in the middle of winter, he would go in through the chimney, which is the opening in the teepee thing, and that's all the story of Santa Claus. And his red face was from doing too much mushrooms or toadstools. So he was a jolly old elf. It was the night before Christmas. So anyway, there is I think quite a plausible understanding that for the brain to develop, particularly in its nonlinear aspects, substances were used. Like, for example, the Eleusinian rites in Greece. The whole Greek community took at least a month doing acid. The ergot fungus that grows on rye was what they used, and it has significant amount of LSD in it. that allowed them to create a culture that is morally, infinitely, and in wisdom, infinitely more far advanced than ours. Now, Archimedes, for example, he could have built much more destructive war machines. You know, he built the catapult so they could knock down the walls of an opposing town or something like that, but they deliberately did not. They respected life and nature, and they knew the magic. You know, Pythagoras, who was my great hero as a child, you know, he wrote the Akasmata. The Akasmata showed up as the parables in the New Testament. He had a virgin birth. His parents didn't have sex. His father wore trousers. So there's a book called Pythagoras' Trousers about that. And he was said to have ascended bodily into heaven when he died. So, you know, the Catholic religion is, it was made up, it's a syncretic religion. It's made up of Isis worship, the Gnostic Church, and then Pythagoreanism.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
How do we know that they didn't have had sex?
Sorry?
How do we know that they didn't have
That's the
had
story,
sex?
yeah. It's actually 1 in about 2 million. I have a friend in Chiang Mai whose parents met for 2 weeks, never had sex, and then he came along. So it is a phenomenon. It's actually 2 ovaries can split and merge. But yeah, I mean, I wasn't there, so you weren't there. We don't know, but that's the story. But the point is that a lot of those, you know, real people, their teachings were brought in to make the Roman religion. And Constantine wanted a state religion. He was from Britain, and Jesus is one of the minor druid gods, so they gave that name. And Krishna, you know, they're literally excerpts from Mahabharata, word for word, in the New Testament. So the Krishna people were there. So, you know, they spent 3 years. They had to have soldiers there stopping the fights, as they were fighting for who